Hello and welcome to the Daily on Defense Weekly Briefing. I'm Dave Brown and I'm joined by Jamie McIntyre and Jacqueline Klimas. It is Mattis Week on Capitol Hill and we have any number of hearings to look forward to, two in particular. Can you walk us through a little bit about what we can expect?
So the Senate Armed Services Committee is having two hearings this week, like you mentioned. The first is on Tuesday. That's going to focus on civilian control of the military. And there's been some concern, not much. Most senators are very in favor of Mattis serving as the next defense secretary, but there's been some concern that he will need a waiver because he hasn't been out of uniform for the required amount of time. So the committee is bringing in a couple of think tank experts to talk about what the implications of this waiver will be for the future. And then on Thursday, Mattis himself will come to the Hill. He's met with many members of the committee already one-on-one. So we'll likely see, some of the issues that were talked about behind closed doors come out into the hearing.
Sure, and it's not expected to be a terribly contentious hearing. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, people have told me that Democrats may hammer on some of Trump's statements and ask Mattis to sort of answer for some of the more controversial statements he's made. But at the same time, he is a retired four-star general who's had an illustrious career that people are very respectful of. So I wouldn't expect to see senators really hammering on him too much.
Sure, but even though the tone is congenial, it's very possible that he could be asked to answer for any number of things or all things that Trump has said about ISIS or the generals or the F-35 or anything like that.
Well, you can bet, though, that they've gone through in the preparations for this hearing, that he's been briefed with some answers that he can give when he doesn't want to answer. Things
right,
like,
exactly.
That's still something I need to discuss with the president, and we'll be open to consultation. So you'll see some of those things where he'll parry some of the tougher questions. But one of the things that they always like to do at these hearings is get on the record from the nominee that he will provide his unvarnished opinion about policy, whether or not it disagrees with the president's policy. In reporting to Congress, they have to promise that they're going to give their best military advice, even if they're in a civilian capacity.
Yeah, and as you know, whenever Senator McCain will question someone months down the road, years later, he said, "Do you remember that time you came before us and said, you were going to tell us the truth? I'm going to hold you to that."
Yeah, it's a little more important with members of the military because they try to be apolitical, so they don't want to be seen as in opposition to the commander-in-chief. When you're a political appointee, it's perfectly good to advance the policies of your boss, the commander-in-chief.
Sure, and with all the things happening this week, also is the Surface Navy Association annual meeting. A lot of luminaries are going to be there, surface warfare leaders, and as usually the case, there's almost always some sort of real-world event for people to talk about, and this week is no exception. Both of you reported on what happened on Sunday in the Strait of Hormuz, where the USS Mahan fired a series of warning shots against Iranian speedboats because they were approaching, and the whistles and the sirens and the smoke screen weren't helping. But we've seen this play out time and again in the Gulf. And something you and I were talking about is what could be different the next time around when we have a new administration and conceivably a very different way of answering some of these threats.
Well, the Obama administration approach to these things is to try to de-escalate them, play them down, say they're not that big a deal. We saw Trump during the campaign get very angry about the fact that Iranian boats were provoking and disrespecting U.S. warships in the Persian Gulf. So you already have a different tone there. And we also learned this week from some reporting that General Mattis, back when he was the top commander of the Middle East, the U.S. Central Commander, was advocating much more aggressive response to Iranian provocation. So it'll be very interesting to see whether they do take a different tack, just the same way they're taking with, say, China, for instance. Or whether, in fact, that Mattis will be sort of the moderating influence. And I would expect that would come up in the hearing. A lot of people, one of the reasons that Mattis is popular as a choice, even though he doesn't fit the civilian requirement, is that he's seen as somebody who has a depth of knowledge, a depth of experience, a steady hand that would help President Trump carry out his policies. So I think that because people want to see that kind of experience in the job, they're willing to overlook the fact that he's not out of uniform the full 7 years.
Sure, and I think you can expect other people to be asking about North Korea as well. And, you know, just this weekend, Defense Secretary Ash Carter sat down to meet the press and talked about what should be done, could be done about the threat of ICBMs now that Kim Jong-un is talking about capability once again. But Mattis could be asked about that as well.
That's right. And of course, the question with the idea that North Korea could possibly launch an intercontinental ballistic missile that could reach the U.S. mainland, whether or not that's the case, the question is, what do you do about it? How do you deal with that? What are the options for preventing North Korea from getting a nuclear weapon or getting this capability? And interestingly, Carter said on Meet the Press that the U.S. is in a position to shoot down a North Korean missile if it threatened the U.S. or its allies. And then the question with that is, well, are we really? What are the state of our missile defenses? Another area, by the way, that President Trump has promised to build up.
Certainly, and it's going to be a busy week, an extraordinarily busy week, so I'm counting on the both of you to be heavily caffeinated. And I'm counting on you to stay with WashingtonExaminer.com for developments throughout the week, and make sure you sign up for our newsletter at DailyOnDefense.com.